Good morning, everyone. My name's Frances Anderson, and I'm the Managing Director of Latham Media. So welcome to another Legal Tech Talks. So today, I'm delighted to welcome an insightful panel where we'll be looking at Coopetition and Accelerator for Digital Transformation, which will be moderated by Saraswat. Now, Ab is the VP of International Business at Litera, a trained lawyer and podcast host, as well as a legal tech expert. In his role, he has helped some of the most prestigious and largest international firms gain access to legal solutions that help their lawyers create higher quality work and faster. Ab was called to the bar of England and Wales in 2015 and has worked for a number of large multinational corporations across a range of sectors, and holds a bachelor's degree in forensic science and neuroscience from the University of Kiel in the UK. So as a legal technologist, Ab frequently attends and speaks at conferences, and he's a host of a popular fringe legal podcast himself. So now, before I hand over to Ab, I would like to, who will actually introduce all of the panelists and outline the agenda. I'm going to go through a bit of housekeeping with everybody. So this session will last approximately an hour, with questions being brought in from around throughout the whole session. So please feel free. If you would like to pose a question live to the panelists, you can do that by clicking on your name, and it will say, would you like to ask a question? And we'll see the blue hand being raised. Or you can put it into the chat function, which we'll see at the bottom, as well as put it through the Q&A. So what I will do is we'll be monitoring this throughout the time, and I know Ab will sort of bring you in and sort of pull the questions in. So don't be shy, join in. And I hope you enjoyed today's session. So without further ado, Ab, it's over to you.
Thank you, Frances. And yeah, welcome everyone. So glad to have you all here today. So the aim of the session today is to really look at what could be possible if you collaborated with your competitors. That's the idea of coopetition, which is admittedly a word I had to Google because I didn't know what it meant before that. But it is the act of collaborating with your competitors as partners to benefit each party and the market itself. The panelists today and others recently launched a protocol for online management tools in the international arbitration space, and it serves as an excellent example of what this can achieve. So today, with this wonderful roundtable, we'll be exploring really what the true impact of collaboration can be. We'll look at what that means, why they did it, and how they made it all happen. And I have four wonderful panelists with me today. I've got Charlie Morgan, Maria Scott, Kushal Gandhi, and Myfanwy. Rather than do the disservice of introducing and giving their backstory to themselves, and so you guys can all start putting a voice to a face as well. I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves in a second. As we go through this, and certainly as we're going through the session, as Frances mentioned, please do share your questions. Feel free to just post them in the chat. I'll be monitoring it throughout, and I'm sure we'll have a wonderful session. So with that, Charlie, if you can kick us off, tell us a little bit about who you are, where you practice, and what your role is.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon if you're elsewhere. My name is Charlie Morgan. I'm a senior arbitration lawyer at Herbert Smith Freehills. I also lead the team's digital law group. And so just to give a little bit of background on the topic and on what we're going to come on to discuss in more detail, which is the protocol on online case management and international arbitration. I am interested in legal technology. I'm interested in the way that lawyers use technology to drive efficiency. And so been doing a fair amount of work over the years on that front, and that has led me to explore opportunities for collaboration with other firms, with other skill sets, and I'll come on, I think, to speak a bit more about that, but that's all I'll say for now.
Thanks, Charlie. And to my digital right, Myf, if you could go next, please.
Hi. So my name's Myfanwy Wood. I am a senior arbitration lawyer at Ashurst, and I specialise in a wide variety of arbitrations under various different institutions and also ad hoc arbitrations. The majority of my practice is not in Europe. It's in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. And so technology in arbitration is something that I have worked with for a number of years and is a keen interest of mine in developing so that we can ensure, as Charlie said, that arbitrations are run as efficiently and effectively as possible in the future.
Awesome. And Maria?
Hi, good morning all. I'm Maria Scott. I'm a senior associate at DLA Piper in London, where I've been for nearly 8 years now. I work primarily in international arbitration, particularly cases in the energy sector. And similar to MIF, actually, my practice covers cases before a number of different institutions. And most of my clients are based all around the world, so places like Russia and China in particular. And as part of that work, I've also come across varying range of different technologies and softwares, the good and perhaps the less good. And that obviously feeds into what we're discussing today. Thanks.
And last but not least, Kushal.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kushal Gandhi. I'm a partner at CMS in London. My practice is in finance and fintech dispute resolution and risk management. Like Charlie, I am a big legal tech enthusiast, and one of the big sort of features of the way I practice is I am very technology driven. So looking at using technology to resolve disputes is a key part of my thinking and passion. I'll hand back to Ab.
Thank you. Yeah, so as we think about coopetition, it's something actually for most people, it is something that's all around us, certainly in the commercial and the wider business aspect. Within the industry, within the legal profession, it seems to be something that's less common, but hopefully becoming more so with the launch of Loophole and other initiatives before this. In this instance, I know, and you all touched on it in one way or another, this is a bringing together of innovative initiatives and technology and law. It's collaborating with multiple and multidisciplinary actors, right? Lawyers, technology specialists, and process managers. So Charlie, if you can give us some background on, and I know there's more firms that are involved in this than just the 4 represented here. There were 6 in total. How did this initiative come to be in the first place? How did you bring it all together, and how was it done?
Thanks very much, Jab. Yeah, very happy to. So I wonder whether it's worth saying a little bit more about arbitration. Some people on the line might not know what arbitration is, and I suppose at its most basic, it's a form of dispute resolution, but it is one that is quite rigorous in its structure. And so at the outset of a case, one of the first things that the parties have to do is seek to agree or request directions from the decision maker about what the procedure is going to look like, how they're going to exchange communications, how they're going to share evidence in the case, where that data will be held, so on and so forth. And to date, there's been some very helpful guidance on what parties to these type of disputes obligations might be in terms of data protection, cybersecurity, so on and so forth. But back in 2019, when we all kicked this off, we didn't think there was really any practical guidance that really helped people and held hands a little bit to say, okay, those are your obligations. This is a really granular way in which you can meet them and meet them in an effective and an efficient way. And that's not to say that people weren't achieving it in their cases. They were, but they were having to start from scratch every time, work with their counterparty afresh to actually discuss and negotiate what was going to be the right software tool for them to be using in the case, potentially having preferences that didn't reconcile. And that all took time, of course, energy, and for the end users of arbitration, it means cost, because any time, as we know, that your lawyers are spending negotiating things will cost you. And so it struck us that there was really a good use case here for some collaboration to try and drive a bit of consensus within the community around what the needs were for the use of legal technology in arbitration, and whether some recommendations could be put that would become industry best practice. And so that's what we set out to do in March 2019. 6 law firms involved, as you mentioned, Ab. HSF, Ashurst, Latham, Watkins, CMS, DLA, and Hogan, Lovells, nearly forgot. last but not least. And what I'm very keen also to say is that you have 4 lawyers on the panel today, but actually the working group is a very mixed bag of expertise. And as well as Coopetition being a key aspect of the project that we were running, another key aspect is actually the multidisciplinary nature of it. And the fact that you're bringing together lawyers who are experts in the field of arbitration and who know the procedure back to front, but also the process technology experts who are able to sophisticatedly discuss and actually kick the tires on the tools that should or should not be used, or the particular questions that should be asked of a technology provider to get the right tool that's fit for your purpose. So we all came together in 2019. We worked for some time to figure out exactly what we were going to do and how we were going to approach this. Online case management struck us as the first fruit to pick, I suppose. And that is because it is pervasive across the entire process of the arbitration. So from start to finish, effectively, you're using these types of platforms. And so we thought that is where our working group, which we named the working group on legal technology adoption in arbitration, could start.
And I think, and just if I can cut you off there, just because I want to pick on some of those individual points as we go through, because certainly speaking about the working group and how actually all of you guys and gals came together to make this happen is important. Especially what struck me is the time frame from March 2019 to now, or last month actually when it was published. It's relatively short in the grand scheme of things. So we'll certainly dig into that a little bit more. Myf, as you were giving your introduction, you talked about, due to the nature of your practice, how working with technology and working with online tools and the general, and I'm sure as actually someone who has such a dispersed practice as yours, you'll probably feel the burden of inefficiencies most. So from your perspective, as you went through this, as you got involved in the project, what were some of the key issues that you wanted to, whether individually resolve or wanted to be resolved in this project?
I think that's right. So just touching on what Charlie had said, one of the real drivers behind this is that arbitration has been increasingly being conducted online. And that's something that Maria's touched on as well. And when you're working cross jurisdictions, you are communicating online, you are filing documents online, you're storing documents and data online, and increasingly even conducting hearings online. And we can touch on this, and that's become a big thing now with COVID. And what was happening is that different parties, different institutions, and different law firms were all using different technologies. And that would be perhaps a different technology for communications, be it via email, a different technology for data storage, a different technology perhaps to conduct interviews, like we're using Zoom at the moment. And there wasn't a seamless protocol, and there wasn't a seamless platform that everybody was using. There was no universal guidance. So what that was creating was inefficiencies. So the inefficiencies would be, as Charlie said at the beginning of the arbitration, agreeing what should be done. The inefficiencies were also different technologies speaking to each other or not speaking to each other. The inefficiencies would also be that some things were done online, whereas some things weren't done online, and then you'd have to upload, download. And the biggest one of the biggest concerns really was cybersecurity. You might have a very, very secure system with a particular institution. You might have a very, very, very secure network within a particular law firm. But as soon as a document is sent to a tribunal member, or for those that don't know arbitration well, a judge, so to speak, they might be using Hotmail. And their Hotmail account might be connected to their family's Hotmail account, or their iPad might be an iPad that's being used by their grandchildren. No one knows. So as soon as that happens, there's a gap. And that obviously just kind of renders null all the other security that has been implemented. So those are the two kind of key areas that as a practitioner, you really want to improve. So getting together and getting the collective knowledge, so having 6 firms come together and say, these are the inefficiencies we're seeing, and having the 6 firms come together and say, these are the places where we see that there are cybersecurity risks, and then having in a group, as Charlie said, not just the lawyers, but then also the the tech professionals to translate that. So we could come in and say, these are our issues, and then we'd have enough people within the group to say, okay, this is how we can solve them. And so that's kind of where we were coming from the beginning.
Yeah, and that's really helpful. And for all of the individuals listening to this, of course, we're talking about arbitration in this example, but I'm sure others can relate to this very much because, working through massive inefficiencies, having cybersecurity issues. I think there's a saying that your cybersecurity is as strong as the weakest human member of that link. And yes, absolutely, as we work from home, as we have, kids and others have access to sometimes to computers and so on, you do have to be mindful and being able to solve that. And absolutely, I'm hearing the pattern of mention, having this wider group mentioned. So I guess, and that leads on to the next point very, very well, which is Maria, for you, I think. How did all of you start to work together? Because, and I ask this because it may seem like a seemingly easy question, but bringing 6 law firms together and then all of the different entities within that, I don't think anyone who's ever tried to do that is no easy task.
Yeah.
So how did you guys make it work?
Yeah. So, well, we met a number of times over the period since things began. And I think it's fair to say that we all had a clear idea that there must be a better way of doing things, as both Charlie and Myf have already touched on. And what's unique about arbitration, perhaps, is that where you're outside of a domestic court arena, for example, so much more of the process is party-led, that actually all of us, particularly those of us working in arbitration day to day, have experience of many of these issues that you might not have if you're working, for example, in a litigation space. And so early on, we discussed the issues that we wanted to resolve. So those have already been touched on, things like securing data electronically and securely. And actually, as Myf has already mentioned, cybersecurity was a real concern for all of us. And things like location-based restrictions on access, and that's particularly important where you have got participants all over the world. And again, where things are online, their access might not be the same. And actually, we decided to step back and map out the process of a typical arbitration and really pinpoint where these issues were arising. That also helped us identify new issues that we hadn't previously considered, because we wanted to make sure that we could cover off as many of those as possible. And that's where the process management specialists that are part of our group really were really helpful. And you can see the results of some of that process in some of the annexes actually to the protocol. And then we use that process to start thinking about the solutions. So having identified the issues, we started to work out what key requirements any solution should have. And actually, if anyone's already looked at the protocol, you'll see a distinction between must-have and nice to have requirements. And that fell very naturally, actually, out of our discussions of these requirements. And eventually, looking at the issues and looking at these criteria we'd identified, we decided that our experience would be best served in creating a guidance document that would be comprehensive and allow participants in arbitration to navigate all the options that are available to them in this kind of software.
Yep. And I think that's really helpful. And actually, I'm going to jump forward a little bit just to give, I guess, scope and understanding of what the end result was. So Kushal, can you actually tell us a little bit about what the protocol was? What was the end result? And then we'll go back in time, so to speak, to actually look at all the challenges and everything else in between.
Sure. As the saying goes, if you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go far, you go together. And that's very true with this protocol, because when you come to look at it, it's very solutions oriented. Instinctively, lawyers are very good at identifying problems, but it's the solutions that matter at the end of the day. And what we have been able to achieve by effective collaboration is a set of the what and the why, as in what are the problems that are being faced, and why they are actually issues, so that a reader and users can actually understand that what we are trying to tackle is not theoretical. There are real practical issues that we are trying to tackle. It's not pie in the sky stuff. So that's key, is to understand that part of it. But then what we've also done, as Maria said, is we've identified the how. We've identified solutions of how you go about solving the problems that occur in real life situations. As Miff sort of explained, when you're dealing with cross-border arbitrations, where you've got parties dispersed in different locations, how do you go about setting up a platform that can be used for sharing? And in some respects, dispute resolution is an act of collaboration, if you think about it, because at some point in time, the right decision has to be reached. And in order to reach the decision, you have to help the tribunal get the right information. And that's why parties at some stage have to come and collaborate. How far they collaborate is another question. And there's lots of sorts of different theories and tactics that one might deploy. But what this protocol does is it takes the debate out in some respects. It's trying to sort of neutralize the points and say, look, you don't need to argue about this. That this is guidance that has been produced that is neutral. There is no game theory here. If you follow this, you're actually going to help everybody. And so that's what we've tried to do. It's about 40 pages, but really the key section in some respects is the how. And what we've done in the how is we've identified certain features of online platforms that are nice to haves and certain things that are must haves. We've also given some annexes which explain and can be used as templates for certain things like procedural orders. But the other key part of this protocol is that it's actually saying to a lot of technology providers, this is our need. This is what we as users need. So if you can come up with a platform and if you can come up with solutions that deliver this, then you will be able to be market leaders in some respects, because we recognize that we can't practically go about solving the problem ourselves, because we have to rely on other people to help us do that. And the other thing also about this protocol is because we've collaborated with a lot of technology providers, it's not aspirational. It's actually very real. So the how is something that can be done, as we understand from all the discussions that we've had with the technology providers.
I think that's really helpful, and I think Maria started touching on it, which was, lawyers are very good at finding solutions to problems, but translating them in a way that's applicable and relevant to a whole host of individuals or groups is super important. And I think we'll get into a little bit more. You hinted at how far you go when you collaborate is up to the group, and that's so important. Having everyone involved there will make a difference, because it almost puts in a artificial checks and balances, so it doesn't sway in one side or the other. Charlie, you started talking about right at the beginning about how you brought everyone together, and how all 6 of the firms worked together on getting this done, but it included more than just the lawyers. It included technologists, included process specialists. Tell me a little bit more around what was the interaction like between these different groups, these layers, and what was the key advantage as you think back to this now? What was the key advantage of in being able to do so? I know Kushal kind of touched on it, that you get to have market leaders from different aspects involved, but beyond just the obvious, what else did you find was helpful?
Yeah, listen, I think those types of discussions where you bring different people together are always fantastic, and you always learn a lot. Too often, I think, in our industry, lawyers speak to lawyers and technologists speak to technologists, and it's sort of, you sit in silos, and if you have a tech problem, you sort of ask someone to call the cavalry from IT, but actually bringing people together, I think, is the best way to do it, because that's where you really get synergies, and that's where your legal specialists can really share and go a bit deeper than a 10-minute conversation on actually what are the processes at play here, and where are the pinch points. Because from a technologist perspective, or from a technology provider perspective, you're not an expert in these processes. And so it's very difficult to actually think, oh, well, how can my tool be bespoke, or how can it be developed further to properly meet the needs of the community when the community aren't really talking to me? And sort of on the other side, you then have lots of lawyers who are saying, we're really keen to make things efficient. We're really keen to go digital. We want to use technology in the most effective way. But technology is not available. I used one last year, and it was really clunky and dreadful, and I'm never going back to it. And again, there you have those silos. Whereas here, what we try to do, and which all of our firms are obviously trying to do internally as well, is grow that discussion and actually bring people together to work through problems and find solutions. And so that worked very well here. And Maria touched on it. We started with big process maps to actually run through the whole gambit of the different processes that take place in an arbitration. And then that's where there were areas of opportunity. So our process specialists were, of course, at the heart of that in terms of making sure we got the structure right in what we were looking at, and bottom things out to the right level of detail. But then our technology specialists were also able to jump in, and this is where you get the sort of ideas as we, the lawyers, were talking about, okay, well, this is our process, this is where I have a pinch point, this is where I always find in every case that I'm wasting hours and hours. The technologists would say, well, very simple, you might not have thought about it in this context, but there's a tool that has been built for something else, let's say, for instance, in the transactional context, which would be perfect for this, and it would require either no bespoking or a little bit, just only a minor bit. So that's where you really get the benefit, and why we structured it in this way, and why I think it's the way to go.
Awesome. And just a reminder for those listening, please feel free to submit your questions. As we go into a bit deeper, feel free to sort of dive in, ask us more general questions on how you start working with individuals. And as you were saying that, Charlie, and I'll open this to the group, otherwise I'm happy to call on individuals. As you were saying that, how do you actually get all the other different layers to be brought in? So as an expert within arbitration or whatever your field might be, it could be transactional matters, where you sit, you have all of this sort of tacit and institutional knowledge in your brain. As you bring in the technologists, as you bring in the process specialist, how do you make sure that you are covering the right things? Who manages that process? And how do you, as a group then, the six firms, start reaching consensus on, let's decide on the scope? I know we've talked a little bit about the problems that you want to solve at the beginning, so that helps. But I don't know who wants to speak on that. If you're unmuted, so I'm going to pick on you.
No, it's a really good question, and I think that the first part of your question is, from what I understand, is how do you bring together all the different disciplines and ensure that all those different disciplines are heard effectively? And I think that's where, as arbitration practitioners, we're really used to doing that on a regular basis in any case, because as Maria said, it's different to litigation in that it's a very party-controlled process. And so it's a process that we, as practitioners, we don't just have to focus on the law, but we also have to focus on who is running the technology, who's doing the translations, where's it going to be heard, et cetera, et cetera. So that's already at the fore of our mind. In this particular group, that's, however, where non-lawyers also play a really important role. So Rachel Barnes, for example, is a great collaborator and knows what the lawyers need and also what the process providers are doing and also what the tech providers are doing. And so she can sit there and kind of just have an oversight and think, actually, that's a great point. I know someone who can give you some information on that. Or that's a fabulous point. I know someone who might be able to speak to that with a bit more authority. So having those type of people in the group is incredibly, incredibly valuable. I think to your second point about how do six firms come together and actually solve what has been identified as a problem is a really, really, again, important question. And that comes from what Maria was saying in terms of when we all sat down, it was very much this is the problem, how do we solve it? We're not sure how to solve it. What can we go down into granular detail as to what we actually are kind of looking at here? So the process mapping, getting all of that information back. Is this something that we can solve ourselves? Is this something where we can develop some type of technology to solve it? And the decision was made, probably not effectively, not efficiently. What can we do then? We've got all of this collective knowledge. What can we do? And that's when it was decided, let's go with a protocol. Let's go with the guidance. So as Maria was saying, it was that decision to come up with the guidance to kind of put all of that knowledge together, which I think was the real turning point for the group. And once we knew that was where we were headed, we were able to really work effectively together to achieve that aim and to achieve it really quickly and really efficiently. Marie, was there anything else that you wanted to add to that?
I think I'd just say that on the first point about, once we were already in the room together, we sort of had a critical mass, if you like. It became really natural for us all to reach out to our contacts or people that we knew, or, oh, I know someone who can do that and help us with this. And I've got a relationship with that technology provider, so let's get them involved. And then you multiply that by the fact that there were 6 firms involved. Actually, it was a process that sort of kept itself running. So once we got started, that was all quite natural, I would say.
And I think, and Kushal, if you can speak to this, because you started going down this route a little bit, because even as you talk about the technology aspect of it, you are asking 6 times X people to come to an agreement on which technology to use, right? And even to have that discussion on whether you use something that exists in the market, as Charlie was talking about before, something maybe that is quite bespoke to transactional work that could be used here with minimal modification, or you go down the path of actually we should create something of our own. How did you approach that discussion? What was the thinking and thought process like there?
So I think it was iterative, and as we've heard from the other panelists, when we got into the room, it was about trying to work out what route we want to go down. And I think a lot of work was done, I should say, by others on the process mapping, which does exist in the protocol and is in the annexes, where we were trying to work out, we as a group, I say, were trying to work out what are the processes that are in play here. What is the sort of practical realities that we're trying to deal with? And once it's almost like any product development exercise in some respects, where we have the need as the lawyers, as the legal team, we have an idea of what we want. We were first trying to put that on paper to see what that would look like, and that's where we had help from people who were able to help us put the process maps together, put the sort of relevant information together in a language that the technology providers would be able to easily understand, and basically say whether or not their product would be able to do something or not. So we were quite conscious that we had to go to them with something, but not a fully developed sort of process and stuff, but something that at least explained to them what we needed in sort of simplistic terms. And having each one of us having used different technologies had an idea as well as to what existed and what the sort of different limitations and in some respects advantages were of those existing systems. And so we were able to translate that into something that we can then go to technology providers with and talk to them about. And as I say, it was very much iterative. So it didn't sort of just start off with saying, here's a document, can you just confirm if you can do this or not? It was very much, here's something that we're thinking about, and this is what we think it will look like. What do you think? Can you give us some ideas as to how you would go about this? And we sort of entered a consultation phase as well. And in fact, we're still in consultation, having launched the guidance. It's currently in consultation until the end of August, which has been opened up to not just the lawyers, but other providers in the market as well.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think there's some key points about, so if I can deconstruct at least what I'm hearing from all of you on how you got to the point of having this 40-page protocol guidance document produced. So initially, you identify that there is a common problem that you need to be able to solve, right? That of there's massive inefficiencies, the cybersecurity risk, and everything else that we talked about. Someone speaks up and says, great, let's work on this together. I'm sure others are having this issue. You meet as a working group. And I think that's where I start seeing the key inflection point of let's start including people who can map the process, not just that you go through as practitioners, but possibly, and please do fact check me on this, possibly also what are some of the potential hurdles for clients and arbitrators and judges and so on here as well. You go from there to meeting, and of course this is a year time frame, but you meet multiple times, you come up with potential solutions. This is when you start instructing, now that you have the process mapped out, you start instructing technology providers that you guys all know individually and the firms know, to start getting involved. From there, you start drafting the document. Is that right? So you come to a consensus on this is what we want to go forward. I'm sure there's a point in there that you have to figure out who from the firm needs to approve certain things, especially from a security point of view. We touched on that a little bit, from a marketing, PR, from all of the other sort of, the bottom of the iceberg things. How do you approach that? How do you approach from an internal management perspective? And I ask this question because the more entities you get involved and the more people are involved, generally, Kushal, you said, if you want to go fast, you go alone. But if you want to go far, you go with others. But going far also means having the extra, not burden as such, but the extra loops you have to go through. So how do you manage those loops internally?
I think it's going to differ for every firm, of course. The one thing I'd also say is there are 14 people on the working group, but actually many, many more people have been involved. And there's also an annex in the back that shows the private consultees that have input. And again, I think going back to the points that we were making earlier around you can't really drive change by yourself. Similarly, 6 large law firms have a lot of clout in the market, but equally can't change it with 6. So we were very keen to go broad and to make sure that we were trying to drive that community-wide consensus, be it with the other stakeholders, as you mentioned, Ab, the institutions, the users of arbitration, who are ultimately probably the most important people here. You need to want to use arbitration as your dispute resolution method. Otherwise, what we're talking about is meaningless. And so we had that private consultation. But in terms of the approval process, again, it's iterative, I think. And with all of these collaboration projects, whether it be this one or others that we've all been involved in, you don't go to management day one and say, I want to do a 1-year project that's going to cost X amount or whatever. You say, I want to have the initial discussions to tease out whether this is potentially a goer. And let's go from there. And then you keep going back to whoever your stakeholders are within the business to say, okay, this is where we've got to. This is the approval you gave me last time. Are you still happy that it's worth the internal effort and time and potentially cost in some projects depending on what you're trying to do? And then making sure that you are aligning. And that's another point that you rightly raised, between the different firms, your internal functions. So if you want to issue communications about the project, are you going to do that on an individual firm basis, or are you actually going to try and coordinate and make sure that everyone is sort of singing from the same hymn sheet in relation to your project?
We can't underestimate or ignore the requirement for internal approvals. I mean, they just exist. But I would say that for me, certainly communications was super important. I'm sure that others would agree with me. Firstly, on my own, and the other people from DLA who were also on the working group, still are on the working group, that we had to make sure we kept the relevant people up to date, and not just, I need an answer tomorrow, but it was a, constant update and a regular update, so that they felt they knew what was going on at any one time. And similarly, as a group, we had to make sure that we all knew what the next steps were, so that could be fed back. So I think the sort of communications point was particularly important.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that it's really important to have the communications, and as a group, it's really important that those communications come kind of regularly, and also with enough notice so that internally people can do what they need to do within their firms. And that's just absolutely vital to any collaboration. I think the advantage, though, going back to what I know I can't say the word that you said. What is it? Competition, collaboration.
Coopetition, yeah.
Going back to that, one of the huge advantages of working in a group with your competitors is that no firm wants to be left behind. So often it's just a case of saying, look, we're doing this. This is going to be, revolutionary. It's going to be fabulous. And, we're part of it. Maria's firm got it done quickly. Can we do it now? And it's amazing how much that would just kind of, open the door to an array of yes. And just something that you touched on before about with the collaboration and ensuring that, all the stakeholders are kind of invested. One of the really key things, and I'm not sure that we've touched on this yet about the protocol itself, is that once we decided to do a protocol, it was really important to everyone that it was of universal application, and that it could be picked up by a law firm in London, and it could be picked up by a sole practitioner in Russia. It could be picked up by a party in Gambia. It could be picked up by an array of different players, and they would all find some guidance from it. So it's deliberately designed so it has universal application, and that it can be used by everyone, so it has maximum buy-in. And I think that's a really, really important point to make, especially with technology, especially with the advances in arbitration, is that we need to bring everyone along in that journey and make sure that it's accessible for everyone.
Yeah, and I would say that's probably testament to the design, the process used to get to that endpoint, because that's really difficult to do, to create something that's universal, truly universal. It is challenging, and I would suggest that if others are doing or producing guidance pieces, that they want to be applicable in such a way, and you all have touched on it in different ways. For sure, it needs to be an iterative process, and I'm sure it wasn't just you had all of these discussions. Even if you are, as Myf, you were talking about, reporting back to internal stakeholders, I'm sure as you are producing the work, as you're actually creating, there needs to be a feedback loop. So you're making sure you're on the right track. You don't want to end up a year down the line and say, great, here it is. And, two people are like, great, this is wonderful. And everyone it makes no sense to them. So I think that's important. And the other thing which I heard there was, of course, communication is super important. And by the way, most of these things hopefully sound really obvious to people, and they should. It's just difficult to put it into practice at the right time. But as you did work to communicate, I really like the idea of basically pitting competitors against each other internally with full knowledge of how effective it will be, because it's important. And that's how you do drive the coopetition part of the aspect forward much, much faster. Tell me a little bit about, as you went through this, I mean, all of this sounds wonderfully rosy, frankly, right? It sounds like you guys had no issues whatsoever in getting this done. What was the one sticking point that each of you had? And then we have 15 minutes left, and I know, Kushal, you have to go at 5:02. I do want to start touching into what was the impact of this? What did you actually hear from clients and others since you published it? But let's pick on what was the difficult part, what was the one part that, and maybe think more generally if others are trying to do this outside of just arbitration from a process design point of view, what's the one thing that you'd want to keep in mind?
For my part, I think the difficulty which I personally had was the time commitment. Because whilst you have the best intentions to want to participate in a great project like this, sometimes finding the time to provide valuable input can be difficult, and that was a failing on my part, and I recognize that, and I think that is something that can happen in projects like this, where you might get a lot of stakeholders who say they're very interested in doing something, and I admit I fell into that sort of classic mentality, which is, this is great, I really want to be part of it, I really want to participate, but there are lots of challenges on my time, and I know that I'm going into some of the meetings and I'm not able to contribute in the way that I want to, just because I haven't had the time to prepare and think about it. And that can be a real problem, because in some respects you're sort of in those discussions thinking, I want to say something, but I've sort of lost a bit of time here because I wasn't at the last meeting, so I don't know what's going on. And so for me to say something now is going to be a bit disruptive. So what I would say from personal experience is, I think in collaboration projects like this, it's very important that people commit the time that they need for this. But equally, I think there has to be a bit of flexibility amongst the group, because it will not always be possible for everybody to have the same amount of time commitment.
And I imagine the more diverse and bigger the group becomes, the more of those challenges come to be, especially making sure everyone's in the loop and is focusing on the right things. And that's where I think, if you mentioned someone like Rachel Barnes, someone similar would be important as you're really driving change ultimately. Charlie?
Yeah, I think just on that point, I mean, one of the challenges was exactly that. So knowing how to size the working group, so how many firms to get involved. And we had great uptake, and so many other people did express an interest a little bit into the journey of joining the group. And we had to decide actually whether we sort of try to keep it more nimble and quick to actually be able to produce this protocol in short order, and then to seek the extra backing through the public consultation, or grow the sort of drafting team, but have a smaller consultation.
I think, I mean, we've touched on it in various guises already, but I think for me it was translating our enthusiasm to do something into deciding what that something would be, and actually reach it. We all knew that we didn't just want to sit and talk for a year. We wanted to actually do something and produce something that was helpful. And I think, you know, we may have already mentioned that originally we did think about, could we put together a product of our own that would meet the criteria that we had specifically identified. I think Myf's already touched on this. I mean, we ultimately decided we cannot do that in the time that we want to achieve something. And in that regard, we had to be realistic, and we were. And so it was I think for me, you know, having lots of enthusiastic people in the room, but actually turning that into a decision we could work towards, an objective we could work towards. That took perhaps time, given that this was a learning process for all of us.
Yeah, and I would say probably enthusiastic people who are so close to the actual problem as well creates for a dangerous mixture, because then you end up in this sort of never-ending loop of, oh, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this, right? And what we call scope creep in development terms absolutely becomes very real. Myf, it looked like you were going to say something as well.
Oh, no, I was just nodding vigorously to what Maria was saying, because I completely agree with her. I think that was definitely the hardest part. And I think that the term that you just used then, scope creep, is a really important thing to keep an eye on. And I think that what Maria's just said, and that decision to take the scope a bit more, you know, and make it a bit more concentrated into what can we do with all of this knowledge and all of our skills, and then have that focus. Once that focus was achieved, things kind of flowed really naturally. It was that getting to that point where you do have to take a step back and say, look, what can we achieve? What can we achieve that will have the best outcome and that will use all of our skills? And once that decision was made, it was fairly easygoing. So no, I absolutely agree with everything that Maria has said.
And as you have the mic, as you sort of start moving towards the closing aspects, would you mind sharing any other feedback that you may have heard so far? And I think it's important just to have that perspective of, as you do publish something, of course, undoubtedly, all of you will be proud of it, and the various other individuals involved. But, you know, there was a purpose behind this. It was to help the wider community. So have you had anything since it's been published?
We've got, just for everyone who's watching or listening, there is a place where you can provide feedback. What I'll speak to now is the feedback that I've received outside of that. So the first thing, I suppose, is just how interested people have been in this. It's kind of garnered an interest that I didn't expect. And I think that's to do with the fact that it's a collaboration, and also it's that cross between tech and law. And so people are really excited about that. I've heard back from, what I'm kind of most pleased about is hearing back from clients. And I've had clients who I've worked with in the past on really big arbitrations get in contact to say, look, we've read this, we've seen this, it's fantastic. And they're thinking about the efficiencies that it's going to create for them. These are clients where I work with them on really large arbitrations, and as I said, they're in, cross-jurisdictional arbitrations, and they're just seeing how seamless things can be. And if you do have this universal guidance, going way back to the beginning of this presentation as to what Charlie was talking about, is that agreement between the parties at the very beginning. If we could cut through a lot of the arguments and debates about how things are going to be done, because we can all refer to a protocol, and if we can cut through having to reinvent the wheel every single time we do something, the efficiencies are enormous. And I think that this is why this is just such an amazing collaboration, because it really is it's an industry first for what we're doing. And the aim of the protocol is for it to become the go-to guide. We want anyone who is embarking on an international arbitration, or even any other form of dispute resolution that might be conducted online, to pick up our protocol as the first thing that they look at when they're deciding what they're going to do and how they're going to achieve it. So it's such an exciting project, and I'm just so I shouldn't be so amazed, because it is exciting, but I am quite amazed at the amount of positive feedback it's garnered, and not just from the international arbitration community, but from the tech community, from the legal community more broadly, and also from different parts of the world. So it's really fantastic to see that happen, and we're really keen to receive all the feedback we possibly can, positive and negative, so that we can make the protocol something that is incredibly workable and user-friendly for everyone.
Kushal, I know you have to run off in a second, so I'll go to you next, and sort of any words and sort of closing from your perspective on whether you have an ask of the audience. I know you are looking at this as a broader project and a key learning point. So anything you'd like to share from your perspective there?
I think, thank you very much for having me on the session, and it's been great getting this opportunity. To the extent there are people on the line who would like to contribute to the protocol, please do. But equally, if there are people that want to sort of get in touch just generally about the collaboration and to talk in more detail about it, then they should, I think, feel free to get in touch with us. We like talking about it, as you can tell, because whilst it's had its pain points, it's been a fun journey.
Wonderful, thank you. And then Charlie and Maria. Maria, you can go next, and then I'll wrap us out. I'll give a quick summary before we close the session.
Sure. Well, I think Charlie actually already mentioned that we, as part of our process, we consulted with arbitral institutions, organisations, and people who are active in the community. And I'm sure Charlie will help me in sharing some of their feedback. But certainly one thing they said to us was that the timing of this protocol felt particularly apt. I mean, apart from all the aspects that Myf has already mentioned, that obviously I agree with, about the move towards technology and digitalization of this kind of procedure, we can't deny the current circumstances in which we all find ourselves. We are currently holding this webinar on Zoom. We might not have been doing in another world. And so, everyone was very pleased with the fact that we'd managed to get this out at this time, really.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think we're really delighted to see that actually the protocol is already being used and is proving of value to people. So, as Maria mentioned, I mean, there isn't really a single arbitral institution globally who's not thinking about how they can better enable their users to share data electronically. And we have had plenty of feedback from institutions saying this couldn't have come at a better time, and actually we're looking at it, and it's really useful for projects that are ongoing in terms of our building our user stories, doing our data requirements gathering, so on and so forth. So that's fantastic. And the only other thing I would say is watch this space. Of course, we're a working group that are interested in legal tech, and we're thinking about other areas where we could add value. We won't be doing things just for the sake of it, but insofar as we identify other projects that are worth the time and effort, we will be pushing those forward. So maybe we'll have another one of these in due course when we've launched our next item. But
Yep, wonderful. And firstly, I wanted to thank all of my panelists, Charlie, Myf, Maria, and Kushal, who had to drop off for another meeting. Thank you all for sharing your experiences. It was quite interesting as you were talking that there were so many overlaps. That to me shows how aligned all of you are. And I love hearing, someone's already talked about this, right? It's great. And you should be aligned in your vision as you work towards this. For everyone listening, and NetNode Media for hosting us, for everyone listening, thank you for participating. I think in summarizing, I would say, look, we spoke specifically around arbitration today, but there are so many learnings here that are applicable regardless of what you want to do. And as you think about how do I approach this, how do I put this into practice in my own, my own space, one of the ways to do that is work with, and this is not the only way, but one way to do that is work with a legal tech provider. If you have one that has commonality across all of the firms, and actually I've worked with all of these firms here outside of this, I can tell you from experience, we've heard the exact same problem articulated in slightly different way by each of these firms separately, right? And we can be that glue, because you do need that common thread unless someone steps up and says, I can see that there is a problem around this. Generally, from especially tech providers, we tend to do our market research before we launch something. So we've approached and spoken to multiple people. The other thing to think around is, how do you start somewhat small, but something that can have a big impact? The timing, you can't always control. Absolutely, the time was right for this. But it's important to think about, how do we bring out the best outcomes, bring in the right skills and the right people. And that means a multidisciplinary team, which was an evident point today of, technologists and process specialists, people who are focused on design, and that are practitioners, because you need all of those viewpoints in order to be successful. And the very, very last point would be, you have to start thinking about, how do we apply technology into all of these different spaces? You have to be mindful of what are the problems that exist, and some of them are right in front of you. It just takes maybe a different perspective to identify what those are. I really like the example I think Myf shared earlier of, you may be sending documents to someone who's using it on their iPads that their kids have access to. I can imagine that is not a unique circumstance in today's environment, when we're all working from home and in various capacity. So how does that impact your work? How does that impact the security? How does that impact your client experience? Everyone loves seeing everyone's kids and pets and so on. But beyond that, from a serious point of view, what is the true impact? And as you think through that, how do you think about solving it? And those should be some questions that give you food for thought. But thank you again very much. Francis, I'll pass over to you.
Thank you, Ab. And thank you, Charlie, Myf, Maria, and I know Kushal's gone. So I'd just like to thank everybody who's joined us today. And I think more importantly, sharing your journey and how you actually got to this, because it is a first for the legal community. I'd like to see more, actually, having been in the industry a while now, just like you, Ab, and many of you. It's a challenge. Firms don't do it, and it's because it's competition. But I think what you guys have done is fantastic, and it's sort of setting a standard, which I'm hoping, in the current environment where we've gone through a huge amount of change, this now means the start of what can be. So really, really well done. And thank you for sharing your story. And thank you for everyone who's joined us today for the Legal Tech Talks. And we look forward to you joining us on the 29th of July for the next one. So thank you and goodbye.